All right. Well, welcome everybody. I am your host, Tim McDonald on the Business of Speaking show. And today I am joined by my guest, Kelly Hoey. How are you doing, Kelly?
I'm good. Good to see you. And thanks for having me on the show, Tim.
No, thank you. I'm so glad that a mutual connection through the Irish Business Association actually in New York actually connected us. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, then that is a great. The IBO is an awesome organization, and shout out to Tammy for being such an amazing connector of people.
Yes, she is. I've known her ever since I lived in New York, and through our mutual connection, who's a past guest, Shri, at one of his social media weekends. So great to have all these dots connected. But for those of you just joining us, if you haven't watched the show before, really what this is about is it's a journey of what it takes to become a speaker, how people got involved in becoming a speaker. But not only that, it's not about what they necessarily share on stage, but about what they've learned since they've gotten on stage and how it's turned into a business for them. And so really it's for anybody, maybe thinking about getting into speaking in the early stages of their speaking career, or maybe somebody who's anywhere on their speaking career and just wants to really amp it up and be able to learn from each other, because that's what I'm a big believer in, is being able to share and learn from others. So with that being said, Kelly, what I would really like to start off with is just, can you tell us your story of how you got started in speaking?
Well, I mean, and this is such a great idea for a show and for people to share their insights. Let me back up. So I'm an author now, and I do a lot of public speaking, and am asked to speak because of the book. But I was doing speaking beforehand. We should talk about that part of it as well, Tim, in terms of the necessity of maybe getting a lot of speaking going before you embark on something like writing a book. But some of my speaking went way back because in my earlier careers, I was in the legal field and then in professional services. I was a manager of professional development for a global law firm. And I was putting together a lot of panels. And well, sometimes the moderators I thought just sucked. The people who I was getting. So I was like, I could do a better job than this. So that was really an entree point for me. And that really got me back into speaking because I had an experience when I was in law school with public speaking that horrified me, shattered my nerves. And if I'd had a choice to do public speaking ever again, I would, based on that experience, I would never have done it. So I got back into speaking because of panels and things I was putting together because of the job I was in. And then when I moved into other roles, I was sort of being sought out to speak or moderate because people saw what I did. I then was putting together a lot of panels and conversations together when I had a startup accelerator, bringing together for sort of educational and informational. That led to creating a speaker series with Apple, which is called Meet the Innovators, which I used to do down at the Apple Store in Soho in New York City. So that that created a whole lot of opportunity there. And then I'm gonna say kind of with my book, that coming out, and so that was sort of all these steps, sort of this long history, and maybe that plays into what some of your other guests have shared, kind of getting on this speaker's journey and turning it into a vocation is a long-term investment. And probably the amount of work I was doing back in the day, as we would say, when I think about when I was this manager of professional development back in 2004, the amount of work I was putting into creating opportunities to speak because I was creating panels, even now that I'm represented by a speakers bureau, I'm still putting in the same amount of work. I'm having to create content. I'm having to create my own opportunities. So why don't I pause there? You might have some questions based on the multitudes of things, but it's been a long journey. And I don't know if I ever expected to have a career where I said, hey, I'm a professional speaker, but that's where it has evolved to. Oh, you're on mute, Tim. We got to unmute you. Oh, I did it again, Tim.
Yep. There I go. We're too quick trying to unmute each other. No, my landscapers are out in front, and I forgot I did that because I usually don't. No, there's so much there, and I just really wanted to start with something that you said that so resonates with me: how panels suck. So,
Well, but you know what it was? Sometimes panels don't suck, but how they're moderated sucks.
Well, that was one of my early experiences too when I was in Chicago. So I'm so curious, because I'm going to jump into some other stuff, but I'm so curious with you being responsible, because I know it's not the panelists that usually suck, it's the moderator's job usually to make it interesting, right?
Right.
And so what did you do to actually make it interesting on a panel?
Well, I used to think about like when did I find it interesting? And I think part of the moderator's job is to get out of the way because it's not about them. And I think about why is someone paid, or why is someone taking their time to show up to listen to a panel? And so they're not there to listen to people recite off their bios for 20 minutes of a 40-minute panel. They're there to get to the nuts and bolts. And so I was really sort of focused on, right, how can I give the short summary? How can we have this conversational, show my age. I used to love the Merv Griffin show. I think Merv Griffin was, everyone talk about Oprah, and she's a magnificent interviewer. But Merv Griffin was unbelievable in terms of how he moderated and engaged in conversations. And so I sort of think about, how can I get people to talk, and how do I get out of the way so that the being the moderator is not either asking questions which people could read the answer to if they actually looked at the speaker's bio. What a waste of time that is. And how you make it about the panel and in terms of delivering information that the audience is there to hear. So that's the way I think about it in terms of being a moderator, and having it conversational, having it engaged, not having something that's so, date myself age-wise again. Remember the dating game? And it was always like bachelor number 1, bachelor number 2. And sometimes you see moderators and they'll do that. Okay, and now why don't you answer the same question? And you're like, really? This doesn't need to be a ping pong game or pass the hot potato with the question. How can we get something that's of value? So I always sort of thought about that when I started moderating.
No, well, thank you. And I just wanted to start with that question because it was I think so many people can use that information and hopefully implement it when we all get back to being in person and actually doing this in live situations.
Well, and one of the funniest ones I remember was it's when Jeff Pulver had the 140 character conference, and it was really fast, short. And remember that there was this one panel, and I think they had 15 minutes. I remember Gary Vaynerchuk had to do a keynote, and he had 8 minutes. Jeff had 140 characters at the 140 character conference, right? It was fabulous format. And I remember Jeff coming on stage, and the moderator for this one panel that looked really interesting, he hadn't really looked at and understood the format and stuff. And Jeff basically came up and said, well, your time's up. And all the panelists had done was talk about their bios. They hadn't even gotten to the meat and potatoes of the panel. And so I was like, lesson learned here. What is someone coming for? Not something they could read. They're here for answers.
No, that's great. And I have a long history with Jeff Pulver too, and his 140 conferences and breakfast and everything else when I lived in Chicago, and I got to see him actually speak in Detroit actually. Yeah. It's a great format, and I kind of miss those days of that because it was a challenge. So my next question is really, something that you brought up that I'm kind of curious about is, how did you know when it was the time for you to start organizing these panels to actually being the one on stage?
Yeah, I think it's at some point you put your hand up and you say that you're the expert. And I was lucky because I belonged to a professional association, and then at work I could put together panels and I could, insert myself in there. And then other people would see me and say, hey, could you come and do this? And then when I was the first president of a global business network for women that at the time was known as 85 Broads, it was sold and it's now known as Elevate. But when it was 85 Broads, in those situations, putting myself forward as the president and being the one who was the, I want to say the master of ceremonies at a conference, or being asked, then I was being asked to speak because I was the president of that global business network for women. But I was really glad I had the training ground of the other stuff. Like it's good to say yes to a lot of things initially so that you can, I want to say, find the venue or find the medium, find the format that works best for you. And then also kind of get the, the mistakes and the flubs and the whatever else, kind of out of the way.
Yeah. And, you also said something that really struck home with me is so many people think there's like this easy button, right? This, as soon as I get here and I press this, it's going to be all downhill, right? It's going to be easy sailing. So you mentioned, you're represented by a speakers bureau, but even though they help you, you still are responsible for doing everything. Can you go into what that means and how it, how you interact with the speakers bureau, how you do your own thing?
Yeah. Yeah, so I was going to say, if you want an easy button, go to Staples and ask them for the easy button. Okay? Like, seriously, go and order your off Amazon or go to Staples, get your easy button, because that's the only place you get the easy button. I mean, it's always outbound marketing in terms of, when I think about it, sort of in hindsight, some of the panels I was putting together and putting myself as the moderator, that's outbound marketing, right? Like I'm creating those things, your blog posts, podcasts, that's all outbound marketing, doing, getting quoted in the media, all that kind of stuff. So I'm represented by Penguin Random House's Speakers Bureau. Penguin Random House is also my publisher. And I'm exclusively represented by them because they actually do some outbound, marketing for me and for the speakers that they are exclusively representing. But for the most part, speakers bureaus, it's what's, coming in, right? Like who is in, hey, just saw you represent so-and-so, or I'd like to. So you as a speaker have to continually make yourself relevant and keep yourself top of mind so that people find you. So I've got a speaking gig coming up next week and it came through Penguin Random House. But initially, the person at the company that recommended me to speak met me at, or picked up my book and heard me speak at the Watermark Conference for Women in Silicon Valley. And that would have been back in 2017, maybe 2017, wow. 2000 or early 2018. So it's constant. And so if you think, or if people think to themselves, I'll get a speakers bureau, and then no, you still have to do the work. So like I keep my speakers bureau notified if I'm quoted in the media. I keep them notified of things so that, because that may give them the little bit of information they need, that they could reach out to someone that, maybe it's an organization, a professional organization or something like that, to say, hey, have you thought about these speakers? Or they'll do sort of targeted mailings every once in a while. But that's part of me keeping them informed and doing the work. And I don't think people, kind of realize that amount of it.
Right. And you mentioned early, and you just kind of brought it up again, that they are your publisher. So how does the book play into your business?
Well, I mean, the book kind of is an element of credibility in the sense of, why is she the expert on this topic? And it's because she wrote the book, kind of thing. And, Penguin Random House is the publisher. So that adds another layer of kind of authority for me about what I do and what I talk about. But doing all that public speaking I talked about before, like speaking at conferences, even if it was, back when I was in professional development and all sorts of things that semi-related to my book, that all that public speaking, and most of that was the vast majority, it would have been all unpaid at that point. All of that was really important in terms of getting a publisher to pick my book up, because that's the other piece on this. You got to do this body of work as a speaker to be taken seriously as a professional speaker. You got to do all that speaking too, because in terms of getting my book deal, the publisher needed to see that I could market a book. And so it was really interesting in my, I remember this in the book proposal. It said, sort of the marketing and the things that I had done, like I had a Twitter account and, I was active on the, all that kind of stuff. One of the things it said, I did a lot of public speaking, and one of the publishing houses that was my literary agent was pitching my book to came back and said, that's nice that you said she does a lot of public speaking, prove it. And I had to send them 2 years, a list of all the speaking engagements over the prior 2 years, topics, audience size, topic, location, and audience size. Because they were like, don't tell us that, you're going to do public speaking to sell a book. Prove that you've already worked that marketing muscle. So some of this thing in terms of doing public speaking, I never knew it was going to lead to writing a book. Part of it was just doing my job. And then it was just kind of fun. But you may do a lot of public speaking and it may provide the marketing fuel for another project, and it may or may not lead into a paid career.
So I'm just curious, because I was imagining this, how I would receive that same feedback about providing 2 years of history of speaking. How did that make you feel, and how did you respond to that?
I'll keep it clean. I was like, you want to see? You know what? You want 2 years? I'll give you 3. And it was like, you want me to prove it to you? Oh, I'll prove it to you, buddy. Right? Like, here we go. And it ended up being a very detailed, long document. And it's sort of like, okay. And so now when I coach people who are interested in writing books and they're thinking about, right, how do I get a book published in the nonfiction space? I'm like, start documenting all your public speaking. And have that in a spreadsheet or in some kind of a document, and put that as part of your book proposal, so that they know that, this is not an afterthought, that you have done the work. And it was one of those things, sort of in hindsight, Tim, when I think about my own career, that I could look back and say, right. I'd started blogging, I'd started exercising that muscle to write, and I'd done this public speaking, and and then all of a sudden these pieces all came together in terms of what I'm doing now. But, if I look back at the time, that was not some master plan, and I didn't know I had to do all these things, but they all came in handy.
So I know almost every speaker, right, has, that I've read or watch their webinars, when they're coaching other speakers, always says how you need to have a speaker reel and a speaker website, right? And so what you were just talking about really reminded me of that, even though you weren't at that point when you probably had all that stuff. And so I'm just kind of curious, do you find value, and did you have to go back and kind of recreate all the documented history? And I didn't even know if they needed video or not, but because you didn't mention that. But how valuable is that when you're just starting to, even if you're not getting paid, to be able to start pulling together and collecting?
I would really say to people, just start. Even if you don't ultimately have your speaking, it doesn't become your business. it's really valuable to have because, okay, let's just take an example. The Grace Hopper celebration, that big Women in Tech conference, a lot of the speakers come from, people who are doing their jobs and they just want to share. They're not looking to have a speaking career. They just want to share their knowledge with their industry peers. When you fill out that application to speak at Grace Hopper, they ask for previous speaking experience. And so rather than sitting there racking your brain trying to think, oh God, what have I done, whatever, keeping that document. I also think in a lot of professions, it's really valuable because during feedback or a performance review, someone may want to know how you are raising your profile within the profession. Or someone may have said to you in a prior year's performance review, they may have said, you need to, and you can come back and say, look, I've done it, right? So it's, there's reasons to do that because, going back and searching and racking your memory. And I remember last year when I became a member of the National Speakers Association, NSA, they required like, hey, to become a professional member of the NSA, you have to list off the speaking engagements, the number that you've done, and you have to hit a certain number over, a year period. It was like handy to already have a list and not have to, go through calendars and receipts and all that kind of stuff and recreate it. So, and it, kind of gives you, there's a moment when sometimes when you think you haven't done anything and then you look at that list and you're like, whoa, hold on a minute here. I've done a lot.
No, that's great. I you remind me of when I was in one of my careers, somebody told me, they're like, does your boss give you an annual review? And I said, yes. And they're like, what I want you to do is I want you to give yourself a monthly review. And even if you don't share it with anybody, just write it for yourself and have it so that when your annual review comes up, you can share it. And what you just explained was almost exactly that advice that I had gotten in that job. So,
well, yeah, because it gives you milestones and things, and it's also to, I'm thinking about a situation in particular where, having a conversation it was a career coaching conversation with an executive who was frustrated with not getting sort of the promotional opportunities. And when we started to unpack it, a lot of the speaking, and she was someone who was very comfortable speaking, a lot of the speaking she was doing was not around the subject. It was within her sphere of subject matter expertise, but it wasn't the subject matter expertise. And I'm like, here's where you got to do the shift. I'm glad you've got this external profile from your company, but you're shining the light on the wrong thing. You need to shine it over on this to get the attention of the executives at your company. And, having sort of that list of her speaking engagements, it just became abundantly clear of the disconnect and when the light went on for her. So keeping those lists can serve a whole lot of purposes.
Oh yeah, no. And I cannot believe that we are almost done with our show. This went so fast for me. But one question that I'd love to ask you before we just kind of wrap up is, looking at where you're at now, and if you could go back to when you first started, what knowledge would you give your younger self to do something or believe in that you didn't know back when you started?
Oh, the biggest thing is realizing that that you make a mistake, or you're that one time where it doesn't go well is not determinative of your ability as a speaker. And I say that because, Tim, when I was in law school, we had to do moot court, like public argument, moot court, prepare to give our, argument and our statement to a, bunch of lawyers who were acting as judges. And it was a traumatizing experience for me, that public speaking experience, because of one of the lawyers who was a judge. And she was just cranky boots at everybody. But I took it personally, and I took it personally that I was really lousy at public speaking. I did no public speaking for 14 years. 14 years I would turn down opportunities. So if I could go back, I would look at myself back in like 1988, 1989, and I'd say, okay, this was kind of a crappy experience. Move on.
I think that is the best piece of advice that we could share to kind of wrap this thing up. So, well, thank you so much, Kelly, and thank everybody for listening. But before we go, how can people find you? How can they connect with you online?
Well, I'm going to say a good place where you and I met, which is Twitter. I'm JK Hoey. That's JKHOEY on Twitter. My website is jkellyhoey.co. So .co, not .com, .co. And if you go to my website, all my social handles, my email address, my newsletter, everything I'm up to, boom, it's all over there.
Well, perfect. And Bert, I want to just thank everybody for watching. And if you haven't watched before, one thing that we do is I am going to actually end our YouTube broadcast, but Kelly agreed to stay on with me, and we're going to ask her one additional question. Now, the way that you can get access to this is you can go over to speaking.business and sign up for our email list. It doesn't cost you anything. Just join the community, sign up for our email list, and we will actually be sending these out on a weekly basis with an exclusive content just for our email subscribers. So thank you for joining us, and thank you, Kelly, for being here. I will see you in just a minute. Okay, done.